We're going to talk today a lot about just overall trends, specifically in the market, not only for this year, but looking into next year. As always, I'm John with Akia, the AI driven guest experience CRM. We're excited to talk to you. Today, we have Andrada connecting with us as well. Thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you give a quick intro and background on your experience in the hospitality space?
Hello, John, and hello, everybody. I'm very excited to be here. I've been in hospitality for the past 15 years, first with Fairmont Hotels in a strategy capacity, and then moving on to Accor Hotels and working specifically with a luxury portfolio. Most recently, I led the hospitality vertical for a technology provider called Beekeeper, which is an employee experience platform. Today, I'm consulting hospitality companies with setting strategy, driving key initiatives, change management, transformation, implementation. I am excited to be here today and share some of this year's trends and implications for hoteliers.
Awesome. Well, thank you for joining us. We're going to gloss over the clear child labor laws that they had you because you've been in the space for 15 years. You must have started when you were 5. So we're going to skip over that. But yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Let's go ahead and jump into it. We're excited to hear your overall expertise as we go through here. So let me drive the slides here if we get on the right thing. Okay. So first, can you give us an overview of looking back 1 year going forward the next year, but kind of break down like the overall trends and what you're seeing just overall in the market?
Generally, good news for 2025. All hospitality metrics are expected to continue to increase, as you can see here in this chart, but not by too much. Economic conditions this year are expected to provide a favorable backdrop for travel activity. Unemployment is low, inflation is slowing, consumers are still spending, and particularly those in the higher income households. However, there are also some risks posed specifically by the Trump administration trade and immigration policy priorities that will impact inbound travel. And here it's trade war responses, visa impediments, and general border and policy uncertainty. I live in Canada, I'm in Toronto. And I was just talking yesterday to someone who is close to the National Ballet of Canada, and they were invited to perform at the Kennedy Center in DC. But they're really not sure they are going to go. There's an apprehension among the group after some of the stories they have read in the press also with immigration issues. So not sure what's going to happen. It's a real risk, and not only coming from Canada.
Yeah, absolutely. It looks like certainly most of the spaces have rebounded since 2020, 2021, right? I think
Yeah,
certainly as we look at $10 eggs, it kind of impacts some things, but we can continue to hopefully get some summer travel in. And as we expect, I think going into this summer, it looks like we have pretty strong forecast even going into this summer.
yeah. If you go to the next slide, actually, it's going to put into perspective where we are today versus the peak we had pre-COVID. Right? So we are at 63%, which is still shy of the peak we had in 2019, which was close to 66% in terms of occupancy. However, in terms of ADR, you can see a huge increase there. So it's actually a 25% increase from 2019. And that's nominal, right? There's inflation there. But even if you take out inflation, then the ADR has still increased by about 10%, like real ADR. So there's a clear gain there. And also RevPAR adjusted for inflation is pretty much on par to what we had in 2019. So it's good.
Yeah. And if you look at one of these metrics, Andrada, when you're talking to and you're consulting with the properties that you work with, are these the three main KPIs that you look at for the health of the property? How do you kind of help them understand these three KPIs?
Well, I would say one that's coming up, which is not even in here, is really a total RevPAR, which is, doesn't include just rooms, but all the ancillary revenue. So that's more and more significant, especially in the luxury segment. And that's one that properties are looking more and more,
Technology can really help expand that, right? Especially specifically with Aki and some other technologies as well as how do you look at it holistically, right? And really expand like the total revenue beyond just the room rate, right? Whether ancillary fits, things that we can offer to them as well. So I think a big key part of that is like, a guest expectation. So do you want to talk us through this slide? I think this was really great on fearful of which bucket I'm in. I gotta make sure it aligns here of like, okay, I keep feel like I'm moving into other buckets, but that's okay.
yeah, I know what I mean. And it's not the younger, too. But I'm right on the border.
Yeah.
So I just mentioned on the previous slide, right, that ADR went up by 25% since 2019. And when you have to pay more for a service, then it's only normal that you're going to have more expectations. You're going to want more out of that experience. At the same time, travel has become a top priority. And that's great news for us, especially for the younger generation, and especially after COVID. And a McKinsey study said that 66% of travelers said they are more interested in travel now than they were before COVID-19.
Mm.
And it doesn't look like travel is just an interest, like a hobby. It's become a priority. Even amid uncertain economic conditions, people are still spending more on travel every year than the previous years. And this chart specifically is taken from a McKinsey study I mentioned, and it shows the percentage of respondents by segment who report splurging while traveling. So you can
Mm.
see that around half of the Gen Z and millennials, they say they splurge when traveling, and the others are not too far behind. And what does it mean? I mean, you have splurging on one hand. On the other hand, you're going to have these increased expectations. If I spend more money than I typically have, or
Absolutely.
I can afford, then I expect more in return.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point, right? Is you can drive your ADR up, and that comes with increased expectations, right? How does that
So, and I'll just talk about one personal experience that I had in January. I stayed at a boutique hotel. It was my first time with that brand. And to be fair, I booked the lowest rates. I just needed a bed before in the morning, like really early in the morning. We had a flight out and I was traveling for work. Even so, without too many expectations, and I'm not a picky traveler, I was negatively surprised. I got there and the room was as big as the bed. I'm not like joking. You can barely kind of fit next to the bed in a room. And the window was facing another wall, like a meter away from the window. And the one time I wanted to go to the gym, because I got there at 6 o'clock, so I had time for that, there was no gym.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
so and technically, I didn't need a big room. I didn't have anyone running around in the room. I didn't need a view. I just needed a bed, like I said. But still, I managed to be upset in my mind
Mm.
because of this mismatch of expectations. In my head, I did not envision that room at all.
Yeah.
So my advice to hoteliers when dealing with guest expectations is, one, be clear with what you offer.
Mhm.
This hotel had stated during my booking experience all the particularities of this particular type of room or the hotel. Maybe I would have been okay with it because I knew about it, or I would have
Mhm.
chosen another place. The second one is stay in front of any potential issue. And I'll quickly give you another example here, which I thought was well done. So this past weekend, my family and I went to the Great Wolf Lodge. We had a great time. 2 days in advance, they sent me an SMS with a personal concierge and saying what the busiest times were for the restaurant. And they set the expectations with me that there may be lineups, and here's how I can add my name to the waiting list instead of going downstairs and standing in line there. So I was expecting a big lineup. I kept checking the website to see, no line. I got there, no line, got in. That made even though it didn't do anything exceptional, just because they set my expectations that there may be lineups, but then there wasn't anything. They over
Right.
delivered on that. I was really happy.
Yeah, they likely sent that to everyone, then everyone changed, right? They're like, "Don't go at 6 o'clock because it will be busy," so then everyone goes and interview at a different time. It was really
We were
busy. I think it's always about clear expectations, clear communication pathways between both the guest and the property. And more, if you're a property and you're not proactively communicating with your guests, predominantly VMS, I would argue, you're really missing that opportunity to generate value. Every time, not only you're communicating with the guest, but every contact point is an opportunity to generate value, not just monetarily. I think everyone has those relationships personally where you only hear from that friend or that contact when they need something from you or they want you to do something. So when you anchor it that way that you don't communicate proactively with them, unless you're trying to upsell them or get them to do something else, it doesn't ring as true and authentic. So a great point of like that is even though it may not monetarily drive that value, and overall can drive value to the guest and then really expand that total rev part you were talking about, right? And other opportunities.
I think that instead of escalating internally, okay, I want to talk to your manager. Can I move to a bigger room? You know, people are more likely to just go to TripAdvisor or somewhere and leave a bad
Mhm.
review. So you don't even have a chance to
Right.
mitigate that before it goes out.
Yeah, and this is the great next slide here. That's exactly the point, right? Is now they don't feel the obligation to notify the property first, right? To give them like first right of refusal. They just want to go online and go viral, if you will.
It's just easier.
Yeah. And to talk about this one, yeah, it's definitely a crowded marketplace, specifically with obviously the brands, but go ahead and talk to this one.
Yeah. So I knew there were many brands, but then even I was surprised when I added up all the brands for the top 6 hospitality groups. And they actually have 155.
Yeah,
Huge. And we know that in urban centers, hotels often compete with an average of 7 to 12 direct competitors within a 1 mile radius, not to mention private rental or, Vrbo, Airbnb.
mm,
So there's a lot of choice. How do you make that choice? And sometimes there's loyalty programs, right? You're loyal to Marriott, you're all going to book Marriott. Sometimes what it fits you. Like if you are 10 people, you have to book an Airbnb. But in general, it's pure research. And I'll give you another personal example. Last summer, I was planning a 3-week trip to Europe, and that took a lot of due diligence. I knew my
sure.
budget. I knew I wanted to be like center city or not, and used several booking engines, meta search engines, all of that. Read so many reviews. And you know what? At the end of the day, I still got it wrong in a couple of places. And one place we even had to move like the day of. So
Wow.
a lot of research, and you're still not guaranteed that, it's going to work out for you. And to successfully differentiate in this crowded market, you really have to show up where consumers are doing their research. And the same McKinsey study I quoted before shows here where guests get their inspiration for their planning. And there are some surprising things here, at least to me, they were surprising. And I'm going to come back to some of them at the end with more implications for hoteliers. But if you look here, 49%, they are asked or they look at the friends and family for advice on travel. And, the travel engine, like the booking engines, are only like third, 37%. And there are a lot of other sources there, including family and friends' social media, what people are posting on their Instagram has,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah,
Yeah, I was going to say, I mean, this is where the old adage of if you give great service, it's going to multiply, by a factor of 1 or 2. And sadly, if you give poor service, it can multiply by a factor of 5, right? Like you're more likely to tell people about a bad experience in detail than you are a great experience. And so how do you hedge that, right? You've got to make sure they've got to be visible, right? And so again, if you're not proactively communicating with your guests, you're not proactively leveraging SMS throughout the guest journey. If the only time they hear from you is like, will you write us a review? It feels very unauthentic. It feels just very much like you're going through there. However, if it's an entire part of the cycle, it's a natural conclusion point that they can go through and say, sure, I had a great experience. And oftentimes you can identify the ones that, had a positive experience even before asking for them.
yeah. So yeah, it touched upon the reputation management. That's really important. And as this image shows, you have all of these different places where you have to worry about your reputation and how you manage it. And I think you're always going to have good reviews from bad reviews, but what you can impact as operators is one, try to fix the issues. Taking the feedback is a blessing. You know what you have
Mhm.
to work on, and so that the next guest doesn't experience the same. And then second, if you get a bad review, always take the opportunity to present your own case. As a consumer,
Mhm.
it is hard combing through all of these bad, good people saying the opposite sometimes. So
Mhm.
presenting your own case really has an impact, and also the measures you may have taken. So do take the time because that's really important.
Moving beyond the room revenue, you touched a little bit about this earlier, but would love some details on strategies for this as well.
Yeah, I mentioned that hotel ancillary revenue now accounts for approximately 10 to 15% of total revenue for many properties. And for luxury, it's even upwards of 25%. That's significant. And as I mentioned before, you have multiple generations. We're all looking for different types of experiences,
Mhm.
budgets, willingness to spend on different services. And I'll give you some examples. Like baby boomers, are willing to travel in the off season. because they can, and not taking, but they will not take a connecting flight or early or late flight. They don't like. Gen Z, on the other hand, they're okay with connecting flights, and they're also okay with like late or early flights if that saves them money. But they may be looking for a romantic getaway on the weekend with a room with a view and jacuzzi, so you can upsell them on the room. So here's my advice for the hoteliers, uh, threefold. One, you'll have a complex customer base, and you need to understand who's who, and so you can target them appropriately. They can be really intentional as to how they want to spend the money. Number two is what I mentioned before, which is do not think only RevPAR. Think about total revenue per available. It really
Yeah.
gives you a more accurate picture of the hotel's overall revenue performance. And third, make sure your team is trained and incentivized for these upsells and cross sells to happen. Most of your guest facing team members are not salespeople, and they're hired to and trained to serve the guest. And sometimes selling can be seen as the opposite of serving the guest. So an upsell, whether it's a room with a view or a spa massage, has to be framed as an experience enhanced for the guest.
Absolutely. And that's a great way to leverage it. You want to make sure, obviously, the staff is trained when they can identify opportunities and moments. With our mini app specifically, what is great is you can bake this all into the surprise and delight guest journey. And you're able to automate a lot of these, kind of removing that reliance purely from the staff to do that. Like you said, some may be teenagers, right? They may be part time, they're nervous, or they may not be asking for information. So this is a great way where we call it smart, dynamic, and proactive upsell opportunities. So if you're already in the account, we can talk about that. But this is a great way to leverage into your arrival guides or things of that nature, actual occupancy in your PMS of what's available of early check-in, late checkout, even gap nights or extending stays where, like you mentioned, room upgrades, right? And it can be totally dynamic. It's very organic happening prior to arrival. And so it's a great way to really expand this beyond just the traditional RevPAR, right? And kind of looking in the holistic view for it. And I'll give you just one example of a small account. I think there was a small boutique property, I believe, and could be around 30 rooms, somewhere of that nature. So pretty small independent boutique property. I met with them last week, talked to them about like, hey, you really should be doing these early check-ins, like if they're available, right? Is specifically during low season, right? You're trying to maximize every dollar during that low season. Checked in with her the following week. Literally 48 people had like purchased the early check-in right there. It generated nearly, over $1,000, which is like 3 or 4x what she's paying for the entire system. And so when you're looking at this, like you're looking in small margins, right? When you're looking at these percentages and these opportunities, and you're doing something as simple as like an early check-in could literally increase your revenue by like $2 to $4 per room per month. Like you can start to see it starts to add up, right? Even if it's just a couple of dollars here, a couple of dollars there, it can be very impactful. Another point here is cost controls, right? What's the old adage? You'll never cut your way to a profit. You've got to always control your cost and optimize. But what are some strategies about overall just controlling the cost?
Yeah. So first of all, just to set the background, I'm sure everybody's aware, but hospitality costs have drastically increased since COVID for a variety of reasons. Labor rates alone have gone up by 40% since 2014. It's a huge cost for any
Hmm.
operator to absorb, given that it's a labor-intensive industry, right? And employee turnover is also super expensive. It costs approximately 2,500 to 3,500, and I think that's conservative estimate to replace an employee to train on board. And unfortunately, I think costs are going to continue to increase overall, especially with the tariffs coming into effect. There will be some inflationary consequences there, especially in the short term. So what can you do to keep costs in check as much as you can, where you can influence? So number one, say it's more focused on retaining employees. Like think of initiatives around employee engagement, better pay, instant pay, tipping, better benefits, more flexibility, career opportunities. Number two, better train employees that makes them more productive. And number three, think of adding technology to complement what humans can do. And so that your technology takes on some of those repetitive tasks and employees can focus on more value added tasks. An example I'll give you here, in an interview a few months ago, the Remington CEO, Sloan Dean, he was saying that they have managed to achieve increased productivity, which has led them to operate now with 10% less staff on
Mm,
average at the property level, on similar occupancy levels as before. So it is really a necessity to do more with less. And I think it is achievable.
yeah, absolutely. And it's putting mechanisms in place for employee training, recognition, handwritten cards, appreciation, right, will help them. And then also, like digital tipping is becoming more and more popular, right? So giving them the ability to do that. As you had mentioned, you're typically working within 1 mile, a half a dozen or more direct competitors. And so you're going to see people come into this space that are willing to kind of overpay to do that, right? And offer tips and benefits and things like that. So if you're not currently doing cashless digital tipping, that's something we support as well. It's a great way to just show some appreciation, make it very easy for the travelers who today is I rarely carry cash, right? So the days I'm leaving at 20 on the nightstand to say thank you is not happening, right? But quick QR codes, quick follow-up messages is a great way to show appreciation for those employees and help them drive some tips as they go through there as well. Reducing OTA dependency. I think this has been a topic for decades now, but yeah, how do we, you said you were going to circle back to these stats, which I see here. So talking about how we kind of alleviate those.
Yeah, like OTAs are essential for customers, and especially the ones that are not particularly tied to a certain loyalty program. OTAs are also important for you to give you visibility, but they're also expensive. And we just talked about the importance of keeping costs under control. And this could be up to 25% of the booking value. So looking back at this chart and trying to be creative. Okay, so if this is how consumers research hotels, cars, attractions, everything, and you have OTAs there as like number 3 most important. Just taking them one by one, I was thinking immediately like friends and family. Maybe hotels can do more with referral promotion. I'm part of all the major loyalty programs, and I have never seen anyone sending a message saying, refer a friend and you're both going to get 15% off your next stay. And that would still be less than the 25% that you have to pay the OT. And I've never seen this being done. And yet you see how many people, almost, 50% of the people are actually looking at their family and friends for advice and recommendation. Now, search engine optimizing Google, I'm pretty sure everybody is working on this, so I want to talk about it. Now, family and friends social media, that's another one that drew my attention. I was wondering, do you have an Instagrammable spot in your hotel, or do you encourage guests to take a photo and then post it? This is how people make decisions. They see something on someone's Facebook or Instagram. It's going to inspire me to go there. And just to mention a couple of other things here that stood out for me. One was a destination-specific website. Can you be more prominent with these organizations and sites? And also online forums. Is your social media manager part of it to talk about what they respond with recommendations? And one anecdote I will mention here, and there was just an article in the Wall Street Journal last week about Four Seasons and how they have taken a gamble with the TV show White Lotus. It's an HBO production for those that are not. It's on the 3rd season right now. It's really a show about wealth, privilege, 5-star hotels, murders, set in really nice vacation destinations, such as Hawaii, Sicily, now Thailand. And Four Seasons were actually saying that the web visits to their Hawaii and Sicily property after the TV show was aired increased by 300% and 200% respectively. So that's a huge win. I mean, yesterday I looked up the one in Thailand. How much would it be? It looked really nice. So in summary, my point is really know how your guests, research first of all, and then be there and be creative.
Yeah, and I think also that's a great point is social media becomes more and more of relevant, especially for the younger generations. I mean, TikTok is rapidly approaching people's like default search engine, right? If they're looking for something, they just look at videos. So being present on that. The other thing I would add too is really looking at your guest journey as like a secular approach, right? Not just a linear line of beginning and end, right? And really taking the secular approach because You need the OTAs for what I would call original distribution, right? You need the distribution channels to get people to find you. It's going to be very impossible to try to compete directly against them. So sure, make sure you're relevant on there, capture them, but you want to really leverage them as like getting them as a first time guest, and then have mechanisms where you want them to come back, incentivize them to come back, but when they do, book directly, right? Because to your point, even if you're providing a 10, 15, and oftentimes even 20% discount, it is still less than the 25, 30% margin that you're giving up to the OTA. And so again, how can you leverage technology for that? I talk to groups and boutique properties all the time where they'll say like, yes, collecting the emails is a priority. We did a staff meeting yesterday and talked to the staff to say, hey, make sure you ask for the email when they arrive, and ask them if they want to get emails. And the fact of the matter is they typically don't ask because they're like, who cares? I'm just trying to do my job and to go through. Secondly, the problem is if you ask me, can I have your email? I'm going to tell you no, that's fine. You don't need it. So building mechanisms in place where you can actually curate this guest journey. And that's a big part of our secular approach to the guest journey, where when they arrive and do the pre-arrival reg card, based on the booking source, it can require them to put an email in. And so now you can capture their canonical email and get their real email. And then you can use that to then power repeat marketing. And you're able to use us to do fully segmented, dynamic campaigns. And like you mentioned, tailor it to them, right? Like no one wants to get just generic messaging. So you can tailor it to them. You know that they book directly. You're fighting an uphill battle. They likely have booking.com, as you mentioned, Andrada, downloaded on their phone, right? They likely have it there. So that's what you're fighting against. You're fighting for the real estate in their hip pocket. And so you've got to be aggressive. You got to know what you're doing. So this is a great way to like getting them for the first time through an OTA. Great. That's a new opportunity. But now you've got to put mechanisms in place. Leveraging technology along with great interaction from the staff is the way that you empower that for ultimate success. So Zohar, I think this was helpful. I'm sure you can go on for another 2 hours to go through. You've got a lot of awesome information in here that really resonated to give some people some strategies of how they could look into not only finishing out this year strong, but really building mechanisms to go into next year really strong. We've got your contact information, your LinkedIn, your email. If you've got any questions for Andrada specifically, I hope it's okay. They can reach out directly to you, connect with you. You've been a wealth of resource to us. So definitely want to give you some shine on that to get people to reach out to you. We've also got a few minutes here for some Q&A, and I will toggle over to see if we've had any questions come through. But Andrada, this was incredibly helpful. While I look up the questions, any kind of parting thoughts that you think through here?
I think it can be a good year. And I think if we work on the essentials or the essential element that can contribute to success, we ensure that it's going to be a good year.
Awesome. Do the easy things really well, right? Like just fundamentals, do the fundamentals really well. Great service, leverage technology, proactively communicate with the guest. Those are all essentials. And then you can start to layer on some other strategies there, dynamic upsells, surveys, marketing to drive further additional results as well. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day and the clients that you're working with to meet with us today and share some of this insight. We found it really helpful.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Awesome. All right, everyone who attended, thanks for joining. We appreciate the support. Look out in your emails for some additional webinars that we've got coming up in office hours for existing customers as well. Thanks to the team for putting this together. Until next time. Thank you.